Reading books aloud with children is one of the most valuable activities parents and teachers can do. Read-alouds can help build literacy skills, expand vocabulary, improve comprehension, and introduce the joy of reading for pleasure. Can wordless picture books be used in read-alouds? We asked an expert. Meet Dr. Tara-Lynn Scheffel, a former elementary school teacher, Associate Dean of Undergraduate Studies, and Associate Professor of Language and Literacies in the Faculty of Education at Wilfrid Laurier University.
I'm a Caucasian woman wearing a blue and white polka dot dress sitting in front of a row of wordless picture books. Hello, everyone. My name is Tara-Lynn Scheffel. I'm an educator of over 25 years. I started off as an elementary primary school teacher, mostly in the early primary grades, and have been working in teacher education for the last almost 17 or 18 years, working with teacher candidates who are on their journey towards becoming educators. And my focus area is language and literacy, so they take language arts courses with me.
Why is it important to read wordless books?
My initial response is for so many reasons and a wide variety of learning opportunities. I find that of all types of picture books, wordless picture books are often the most accessible in that these books meet learners where they're at. They're open-ended, they can be used across languages and before children can read. My thinking about wordless books has been influenced by articles I've read over the years, written by classroom educators and professors of literacy education. One that comes to mind is by Frank Serafini in The Reading Teacher. Serafini challenges the idea that wordless books are less than because the words are missing, instead referring to them as visually rendered narratives to highlight the complex narratives told through the visuals. I sometimes observe teacher candidates browsing a wordless book and then putting it back in favor of one with text. At first glance, it may seem a wordless book does not have the same potential. It might feel too hard or too easy. But to go back to a quote from Frank Serafini, he stressed that all readers can enjoy wordless picture books and should be exposed to them, whether or not they can read words proficiently. Wordless books allow learners of any age to participate in reading, sharing what they know, see, and wonder. And there's a wide variety of wordless books. There's books about important topics like friendship and community, mental health, what makes a family, loss, and hope. And within those books, we'll find realistic experiences like a joyful day at the beach or meeting a new neighbor, making a new friend, or going on a walk through town with a parent. And then there's also opportunities in some picture books to observe the wonder of nature. In other ones, there's imaginative experiences. And then there's some that mix the two of those. So you're both observing the wonder of nature, but there's an imaginative experience that's happening at the same time. Learning opportunities can include a focus on oral language to talk about the story that's unfolding in the illustrations. Educators can invite learners to share observations and can work with learners to ask deeper questions by revisiting key details within the illustrations. But these books aren't just limited to conversation. Similar to other picture books, learners can be invited to respond to the story in multimodal ways, from drawing to writing, art making, and drama.
How do you select wordless books for reading aloud?
I look for wordless books that invite wonder, curiosity, and imagination. I consider the multiple layers of thinking within the story that will invite engagement with a group of diverse learners. For example, is there room to share multiple perspectives and understandings as learners make connections and share insights based on their experiences? I do find that evaluating quality is often dependent on the age of learners that an educator is working with. One important piece for wordless books is to look at the reading path. Some wordless books have full-page illustrations where the turning of the page signals what is coming next. Others are told through a sequence of images like a graphic novel. Questions you might ask about the reading path are, is it clear? What cues has the author-illustrator provided to help the reader move through the story? For example, are there signs of movement from the character that show maybe where the character is looking or moving towards? Their facial features, use of color that signals where to look or who to follow, or color that signals a change in mood. And then there's often the use of onomatopoeia or environmental print. So a sign, for example, to indicate the type of store that might be in the illustration, or even a keyword or two. I find that most wordless books, they really aren't completely without words. I think as well about how I'm invited to the story as an adult learner. Am I able to follow what is happening in the narrative as it unfolds? What context cues within the illustration support my reading? How will I need to help learners navigate the reading path if it is a more challenging one? Another piece I look at in terms of book selection is whether the story tells a single narrative. Is it literal? Is it easy to predict? Or are there underlying themes that you want to prompt learners to think about? Like all books, an important part of book selection includes thinking about representation of characters. Can learners see themselves in the books we work with? So for example, in the picture book Whirl, there is a page depicting individuals moving along a path in various ways. We see someone walking a dog, we see someone skateboarding, someone bicycling, and then we also see someone pushing a wheelchair. In another example of the picture book next door, there's the inclusion of American Sign Language within the story as the young learner, who is one of the main characters, is sharing their language with another child. Since there are no or few words in wordless books, gender may not be ascribed to different characters. Sidewalk Flowers is a great example of this, where a father and child take a walk through town. We see a child with their father, which can resonate with multiple readers as they think about walking with a parent. And we also see that that child is not given or presented in such a way to suggest that they might be a girl or a boy. In other examples, if students in their retelling, for example, assign gender, then this can lead to conversations about what we notice about characters, but also why.
How can these books help both beginning and more advanced readers?
For young readers, they can read the illustrations. In this way, they are not dependent on text only to read the story. Younger learners will most likely begin by telling what they see. This will be their initial entry point into the story. I love that there is not a right or wrong way to reading a wordless book, but I see it more as a deepening of understanding where a parent or educator can point out new vocabulary and help the reader to cross-check by thinking aloud with them. For example, I wonder what this means, or I wonder what's happening here. You might also write down the vocabulary, and this becomes a form of labeling the story. So you kind of begin to add words, or you might have a note paper beside as you're reading, and then you might, or even sticky notes are great for this, where you can write the word on the sticky note and then place it on the story. For younger and older learners, wordless books can be used to support higher order thinking skills like inferring, as learners infer what is taking place in the illustrations based on other information they have collected through the reading or their own experiences. For example, I wanted to share a page from Woodrow at Sea, a text that supports narrative storytelling as readers follow along with Woodrow and his adventures. The book uses thought bubbles, which we often see as having text, but in this case, showing the thinking of the character through images. Readers need to infer from the images as to what happened to Woodrow. This is a great launch into quotation marks as learners learn how to describe in a meaningful way, moving on to using adjectives, for example. And with all of these wordless picture books, they're wonderful resources to use with students who may have English not as their first language. They support our culturally and linguistically diverse learners because image becomes their entry point into the story. They're able to share how they've made sense or what they see. And that kind of goes back to the idea of there not being a right or wrong. And so they might begin by labeling and adding one single word and making their way up into adding sentences as they go. They're also great points for conversation, and that also is going to support all of our learners. Another example is The Paper Boat by Tara-Lynn. And with this example, I wanted to mention how not all wordless books are written for very young children. We often think that because there are no words, that means it's just through images that we're telling the story, and then it's just for very young children. But in this case, as I mentioned, the use of some text, we can see headlines feature from the very beginning. Headlines such as "The war is over" and "The Vietnam War." And in this story, how Lamb is sharing an experience of fleeing from a country. So we have this refugee experience that is being shared through powerful images and metaphors throughout the story. We also see here that sort of graphic book-like paneling that I mentioned earlier, so that you're following along through the images, and that's the reading path to tell the story.
What are some ways students could respond to a wordless read aloud?
One of the first one is through oral communication or being able to verbally share and story tell. I really like the 4 questions that are outlined by Jim Trelease when reading wordless books. So he suggests that we prompt learners to think about, what do you think is happening here? So that's a comprehension focused question. What makes you think that? So that's the inferring question. What do you think will happen next? So then we bring in predicting. And then the 4th is why, which really helps to focus in a little bit more on vocabulary and oral language. Wordless books can lead to a wide variety of response activities. So that might include story mapping, sequencing, writing the story that goes along with the illustrations, perhaps even generating a class book together, where learners take the different pages and they add the story and sort of it builds as they go along. I really find that wordless books, within wordless books, the illustrator's style often stands out even more so. The learners can be invited to create a page with that same type of illustrator style or their own book using that similar style as well. I also recommend pairing with other texts, so using nonfiction, other fiction stories around a similar topic or theme, a poem. All of those different texts can again help to add layers so that the text, that the wordless book, which may not have words, it has thinking that can be applied and made sense of in relation to the other text that you're looking at. So I want to go back to the example of whirl again. This is one of my new favorites that I've discovered just this fall. But in this story, it follows the journey of a maple seed. And there's so much to observe in this book, beginning with the placement of the author and illustrator names on the front cover. You see that, you sort of see the whirl already, the swirl that's happening. And as the maple seed travels from page to page, we see the ways that others interact with it. They observe its path, they take joy in its movement, and the reader is provided glimpses into a neighborhood from various perspectives. We have the combination of full page images as well as that graphic style to help tell the story. And going back to the reading path, even the whirl itself helps to direct the reader on sort of where to follow as they move their way through that image. So we have the combination of full page illustrations and then the graphic style. We call those panels or gutters, or the white space that goes around, just to help distinguish that you move from one illustration to the next one. And that also helps to sort of signify a change in time or scene. These are also pieces I learned from St. Frank Serafini that I mentioned in the article that I've been influenced by over the years. The maple seed is collected by a child on a walk with a grandparent, where they then bring it inside for art making. So I find this is a built-in invitation within the story to invite learners to do the same thing. Most picture books have these types of invitations in them that we always think and encourage teacher candidates to think about. When you finish that story, what are learners going to want to do? And when they see the things that happen in the story, such as this, making art with natural and found materials, it invites them to try the same thing. Once home, the young child removes the seed from their artwork and they return it to nature. And so we get to then follow that seed as it comes to reseed itself and grow into a maple sapling. So the journey takes readers through the seasons. It invites the pairing of nonfiction books or videos about maple trees. One of the neat things about this book too is at the very end. So again, even though there aren't words within the story, we have a page at the very end of maple seed facts. And this becomes a way to interact with the text following the reading of the story together. Teachers can share these facts, such as the different nicknames for maple seeds based on where you live, whether it's a whirligig or a maple key or a whirlybird, a twister, a whirler, polynoses, and helicopters. Helicopters is the one that I remember from when I was little. This is a great opportunity to learn new vocabulary as well. So, being able to look at those words, practice saying them, look at those sounds, take a closer sort of breakdown of the small words that are in between them as well. It would also be a great activity for making words where you take all of the individual letters, for example, in the word helicopter, and then together you build from small words, right? 2-letter words where you can offer the sounds and help the learners to build those words together and then find more complicated words that they build as they go. And again, this is a way to help all the learners in the class dig into the vocabulary, but in a way that you can scaffold as an educator. The focus on the title whirl itself can lead to an examination of verbs and role-playing those movements, right? So whirl is one way to describe what they see happening with the maple key throughout the story, but what other kinds of descriptive words will the learners come up with that they can then role play? And then we have word study, which can take a closer look at the spelling of the word whirl, the use of blends, the consonant digraph, which is the WH sound. So when you have 2 sounds come together to make a new sound. And we even have an R-controlled vowel pattern here, which is the IR. So just in one single title, we have this opportunity for word study on top of all of the other many rich opportunities we had for storytelling as well from this story.
Can you share some tips for a wordless book read aloud?
In addition to the other things that we've talked about today, I would just suggest that you consider how you will display the text. This is such an important piece for a wordless book. Since the illustrations are key to understanding the story and to share observations and make predictions, it's important that everyone can see them. So you might choose to display them using a document camera, or perhaps you'll be able to find a digital version that can be played and paused. For a small group read aloud, you could try and locate multiple copies of the book from the library. And those would be just a few ways that you might help everyone to be able to take that really close look at the illustration. And then I also suggest, just don't forget or don't take for granted that learners know the reading path or how to read a wordless book. So as the educator, if you think aloud with them, you can point to features that you notice or that you want to help them to notice to sort of model where to look and what information to gather from the pages as they're looking at them. Many picture books don't have page numbers, wordless books included. So think about how you're going to manage that aspect for your read aloud. One idea that I often use is to mark pages with sticky notes. You might have seen some of them on the sides of the pages that I was holding. Using image identifiers. So using image identifiers can also be helpful for learners so that you're asking them to, for example, turn to the page where the character is peeling back the wallpaper for the very first time. So things that just help them to get to the place that you would like to then have them or encourage them to dig in a little bit more deeply. In the questions you ask, consider how you can point learners to look more closely at the illustrations, from the facial expressions to the use of color, as well as changes in mood or setting throughout the story. I find sometimes these are the things I don't necessarily think of, and then when you're reading them with a learner, they notice that and share it back with you. So never feel like you know the whole of that story. Leave yourself open to hearing what they see, the ideas that they bring, and help you to think about as well. And then I just encourage you as well to read the reviews before working with the text, because this is, again, something that might point you towards something you didn't notice in the story. So for example, maybe the mood changes from lighter to dark, but you were focused on something else when you were reading the story. So now you can go back and think about that, and it becomes a point that you can raise with your learners as well.
Why is it important to use Canadian books?
I have a collection of wordless books that I've collected over the years, and some have been those happy happenstance books that you find when browsing through a bookstore, one of my favorite things to do. Others are ones that I've purchased after reading about them in journal articles. And I realized in checking authorship for this video that most of my wordless books were not Canadian, and that was surprising to me. And I feel like I've enjoyed this exploration so much into Canadian wordless books. it's introduced me to new authors, but also Canadian authors that I already knew for other books that they had authored, like Tara-Lynn and Joellen Bogart. And it made me think about how this could lead to a Canadian author study to explore the inclusion of wordless books with other picture books by the same author. Two Canadian authors stood out for having multiple wordless books, so that could lead to doing an author study focused on this particular genre as well. So for example, by Tara-Lynn, who has several wordless books. And then I noticed too that for most of the Canadian wordless books that I explored, the narratives did not often appear to be specific to Canadian contexts and landscapes, but they included a diversity of characters. So looking up the author and reading reviews can be really helpful here to better understand the inspiration and the intent behind the story. And at the same time, the wordless nature of the books, it offers this bridge to Canadian context where readers can then draw on what they know, their funds of knowledge, right? The experiences and prior knowledge that they have, and to be able to bring that then to deepen their thinking.
Thanks to Dr. Tara-Lynn Scheffel for sharing her expertise, and to Dr. Laurier McKee, Associate Professor in the Department of Curriculum Studies at University of Saskatchewan, for her guidance on this project. For more growing literacy tips and resources, visit the Canadian Children's Book Centre at bookcentre.ca. Thank you to the Canada Post Community Foundation for their support of growing literacy.